Good evening. I would like to welcome everyone to another fantastic lecture in the series From the Margin. Elisa Damaschke, our curator for modern contemporary art, has conceptualized the series also to give a deeper look into the archive, and she's inviting very proficient speakers to the series. And today we have Matt Retallick here with us, who has a longer history with the museum already. So he was here during his research for his PhD, which he finalized and has made it into a book, which is fantastic to hear. And this is exactly what we're here for. So we're a museum with an archive, which should be put to use actively. And Matt has seized this occasion and has brought things also and lifted things from the archive, which we are also not very well aware of. And the series From the Margins is exactly also this tool, I think, which Elisa conceptualized in order to look at different biographies, at different also art directions that are then coming up and are objectified in the archive in some way. And Elisa will give a short introduction also to Matt, his work. He's here from London tonight, and yes. Mm-hmm. So Elisa.
It was in January 2022 that Matt Retallick, our lecturer today, first got in touch with us at the Georg Kolbe Museum. I believe that's right, yeah. 2022. At the time, he was conducting research for his doctoral thesis, which focused on the Gera-born painter Karl Weschke. Matt was investigating artistic influences on Weschke and was therefore here and keen to see Georg Kolbe sculptures in person in order to compare the stylistic similarities between Weschke and Kolbe. Matt successfully defended his dissertation at Manchester Metropolitan University back in 2023, and it's due to be published as a book next year, so there's already a reason to congratulate him. Matt has been a guest at our archive several times since 2022, as the Georg Kolbe universe has continued to interest him to this day. He is currently researching Kolbe's connections to Great Britain, a topic that has been completely overlooked until now, and it is all the more important for it. The fact that Matt is speaking this evening as part of the series From the Margins, Rediscovered Lives from Archives, is something of a homecoming, I believe, and therefore a particular delight. The painter Karl Weschke never met Kolbe. There is no correspondence between them, only a formal link through their art. This makes Weschke an exception so far in our research and lecture series, as we usually draw thematically from Georg Kolbe's extensive network, following the traces that his written estate allows us to discover. In this context, we hear from those who have been marginalized, who perhaps never even stood at the center, and who nevertheless deserve our attention. Weschke was certainly on the fringes too, and at the same time, after all, we love drawing connections. A link can be made to Marlo Moss, the artist we are honoring in our current exhibition. Like Moss, Weschke also lived in Cornwall, she in Lamorna, and he in St. Just. Is that pronounced correctly? Yes. Okay. If you were to walk, it would take about 3 hours, I found out, to get from one place to the other across the southern tip of Cornwall. Because of this geographical connection, it seemed to us an excellent idea to invite the wonderful Matt in this context of the exhibition to tell us more about this German in Cornwall. And Matt himself has a geographical connection to Moss and Weschke. He grew up in Cornwall and first encountered Weschke's work there as a teenager. That was in 2005.
Yeah.
At the Tate St. Ives, which was hosting a solo exhibition of Weschke's work at the time. From seeing Weschke in St. Ives, Matt moved on to study curating at Central St. Martin's in London and social sculpture in Oxford. As senior lecturer in art history and curating at Manchester School of Art, his research focuses on transitional moments and slippages between artists, movements, and ideologies. In 2023, he was appointed curating subject lead at Manchester School of Art. Alongside his academic practice, Matt has held curatorial roles at a range of public and commercial cultural institutions, and numerous exhibitions were and are the result. His expertise includes St. Ives and Cornish modernism, British, Irish and German contexts, and last but not least, Matt is co-lead of the Anglo-German Research Group.
Of which you are a member.
I am a proud member. It is a pleasure, Matt, to welcome you to this lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this evening for this talk, which is titled Sturmfloten, Karl Weschke, a German in Cornwall. So it's a pleasure to be back in Berlin, even more so to be here at the Georg Kolbe Museum, which remains one of my favourite cultural institutions anywhere in the world. I'm especially grateful to Dr. Eliza Tomaszka, Dr. Kathleen Reinhardt for their kind invitation to be here with you this evening, and also to Dr. Lucy Howarth, who is co-curator of the current exhibition here, which we can see all around us, Creating Space, the Constructivist Arlo Moss. I'm going to aim to speak probably for about 45 minutes to an hour thereabouts, which should leave some time for questions at the end if you have any. I only wish I was confident enough to deliver this talk to you in German. Sadly, that's not a skill that I possess, so please forgive any mispronunciations along the way. As Elisa said, Karl Weschke was the focus of my doctoral research, which was completed in autumn 2023. And he is also the subject of my forthcoming monograph, which is titled Karl Weschke and Cornwall's Lost Modernism. And that's going to be published by Lund Humphreys in the UK in March next year. Much of the material that I'm going to present tonight in this talk is revealed here publicly for the first time. And it examines how, despite Weschke's turbulent and complex relationship to Germany, German artistic influences remain present throughout his entire career, but mediated through that unique context of Cornwall, where he lived from 1955 to his death in 2005. I'm going to take a broadly chronological approach to the talk, looking at key German influences in focus. But before I do, I wanted to give a sense of Karl Weschke's formative context. Okay, so Karl Martin Weschke was born in June 1925 in the village of Tauben-Presskauen on the outskirts of Gera in the state of Thuringia. His early life was marked by hardship, so at just 2 years old he was placed in a children's home and he remained there until he was 7. Poverty prevented his mother Elsa from caring for him, and his father, Hermann Hanke, was an anarchist who was on the run and was almost entirely absent. Weschke is said to have seen him only once when he was aged 11. So his years in the children's home unfolded against a period of growing instability in Germany, not least felt in Gera. Of course, as you will all know, the aftermaths, ripples of the 1929 Wall Street crash hit local industry hard, unemployment rose sharply, and the National Socialist Workers' Party gained increasing support amongst disillusioned voters. Thuringia was among the first states to see National Socialist participation in government in 1930, and by 1932 the party had become a dominant force in the region. The wider climate likely contributed to Weschke remaining in institutional care rather than being placed for foster care or adoption. And this is a position that the historian Richard Grünberger has explored in detail. Despite its strictness, The children's home offered a measure of stability. It offered access to basic education. Weschke recalled being taken to the local library, for example, to read, to nearby galleries. And it was these galleries that provided his formative encounters with art and culture. As a child, he became captivated by the adventure stories of Karl May. He would apparently also sneak into the local kino to watch films, in his words, by Marlene Dietrich, G.W. Pabst adaptation of Brecht's The Threepenny Opera, Boris Karloff starring as Frankenstein's monster. However, this sense of discovery, of course, gave way to the compulsory. In Karl Weschke's case, this shift is most evident in relation to the propaganda film Hitler Junge Quecks from 1933. This was the film that played a central role in the moral instruction of young Germans under National Socialism. The film, of which we can see a shot of here, the film follows Heine, who's this young working class poor boy, growing up in his family. He sort of turns away from his drunk, absent communist father to join the Hitler Youth, and ultimately becomes this martyr for the Nazi cause. During my research, I found how Karl Weschke's childhood recollections seemingly incorporate the indoctrinations of such propaganda, and tellingly, a majority of which can be sort of mapped onto this film as one example, which is why I'm talking about today. Like the film's protagonist, Heine, who is presented with a uniform whilst recovering in a hospital bed, which you can see in this image here, Karl Weschke said in his own recollections that he received his one Christmas morning while still in bed, sort of wrapped in tissue paper. And that's exactly what is happening here. So in both instances, that gesture carries this really symbolic weight. Each boy is marked by the presence of this estranged communist father as well. So the Hitler Youth had already set Karl Weschke on a path towards military service, priming him for the Luftwaffe, which he joined in 1942 at age 17. I've just noticed that's wrong on screen. So there he trained as a rear gunner and parachutist. By August 1945, however, the war had caught up with him and he is captured by Allied troops in the Netherlands. He spent time in a Dutch hospital, and then he was transferred to another on the outskirts of Glasgow in Scotland. And from there, he was sent to a prisoner of war camp at Chepstow in Wales. At Chepstow, Weschke and other prisoners were forced to confront the full, devastating reality of the Holocaust. Graphic films were screened that laid bare the atrocities uncovered in the concentration camps, and after which they were interrogated and assessed, their political loyalty scrutinised, and then looking to see if they had capacity for rehabilitation. Weschke was given a C+ classification, which meant that he was officially deemed as uncorrectable, and he was therefore sent back to Scotland, but this time to Camp 165 at Watton. This was a camp that was reserved for what were considered by the British authorities to be the most hardline Nazis in their view. Among the people who were also held there at the time was Paul Schroeder, who had worked on the development of the V2 ballistic missile, Paul Werner Hoper, who was the former commandant of the Stutthof concentration camp, and Max Wuntscher, who was one of Hitler's personal aides. And according to Weschke, it was him who first spoke to him about this idea of these artists as degenerate, this degenerate generation of artists, grouping of artists. Weschke at this time, of course, as that categorization shows, was firmly a product of National Socialist indoctrination. His behavior in the camp reflected that. He was frequently placed in solitary confinement, on one occasion for raising a makeshift swastika flag in the camp. Yet Camp 165 also marks a crucial turning point for him. Through the Red Cross, his mother had managed to get a letter to him with devastating news. She had discovered that his father had been murdered at the Buchenwald concentration camp. All correspondence was screened, and the camp's leader read the letter. He took pity on Weschke, and this pity would change his life. In 1947, he was transferred to the Radwinter student camp at Saffron Walden near Cambridge. Radwinter could hardly have been more different from Camp 165. Here, the emphasis was placed on rehabilitation through education, and at first, Weschke found it deeply uncomfortable to discover that he had little reason left to hate. The camp's experimental ethos was shaped by Charles Stambrook, who was a Jewish refugee from Vienna, who set about introducing the predominantly German prisoners of war to English culture and customs. It was also through Stambrook's initiative that the men, who were tellingly referred to as students rather than prisoners, were transported by lorry to Cambridge University for a series of elective lessons. Weschke enrolled in a course titled The Essence and Language of Art, which was taught in German by Rudolf Wolfried. It seems that little information on Wolfried survives, at least I have found very little in my 7 years of research. However, from what I have managed to find out, that he was a sculptor who collaborated with architects in Amsterdam, he produced sculptural works and tile designs, and he was also associated with the Hamburg Artists Association. During the interwar period, he also exhibited with artists such as Kurt Schwitters and Siegfried Charoux. Wolfried deliberately exposed his students to the work of artists who were deemed as degenerate under National Socialist ideology, most notably Ernst Barlach, who, according to Weschke, had been a close friend of Wolfried. And here on screen, you can see how that exposure to the work of Ernst Barlach influenced Weschke in one of his earliest artistic outputs. Although titled Deutschland 1946, the sculpture was in fact made at Radwinter in 1947, and the similarities here are striking. Weschke's clay figure closely echoes Barlach's Rest on the Run 1, with both works depicting an adult and child cowering beneath the shelter of a blanket. While I do not know with absolute certainty that Weschke had seen a reproduction of this particular Barlach sculpture, it does seem highly probable, particularly given Wolfried's close friendship with the artist. Both sculptures capture a powerful sense of vulnerability and protection, poignant and suspended moments of survival. In the Weschke piece, a child clings to the leg of a male figure, prompting us to wonder whether this gesture reflects an artist grappling with the absence of a father, or perhaps a deeper sense of loss tied to the Heimat he once knew. The artists known to have been taught to students by Wolfried were, for the most part, outsiders, figures who, in their different ways, resisted or defied Nazi ideals. Their influence provided Weschke with a framework through which to articulate his complex relationship with war, trauma, national identity, and artistic rebellion. Weschke's early artistic experiments were predominantly sculptural, and this is also hardly surprising given that the National Socialists had elevated sculpture above other art forms, believing it best conveyed the vital qualities of power, authority, and masculinity. At the same time, a Quaker named Bessie Midgley, who lived at Saffron Walden, played a quiet but significant role in nurturing his development. She regularly opened her home to students, prisoners, offering them tea and hosting discussion groups. Recognising promise in Weschke's emerging work, she went further, providing him with a room to use as a studio alongside essential art materials. Although it had been originally suggested to me that this sculpture is made of clay that was dug up from the ground at Radwinter, it seems far more likely that this clay formed part of that practical support that she applied. In April 1948, Weschke was released from prisoner of war status and, as was required of him, registered under the Alien Restrictions Act. The conditions imposed by this registration limited where he could live and work, and he initially returned to Scotland, taking a position with the Forestry Commission at the Crake Forest near Hawick. In 1949, however, Weschke had relocated to London, to Belsize Road in Kilburn. Interestingly, though it's unclear whether he was ever aware of this at the time, I recently discovered that Charles Stambrook of Radwinter was living just 2 streets away from him. This part of North London evolved into what many came to call Britain's emigre capital. This is explored in depth in Owen Hatherley's recent book, The Alienation Effect, which examines how European emigres shaped British culture. He described how the area became home to various German, Austrian, Hungarian, Czech, Slovak, and Jewish emigres. This transformation was so pronounced that, as Hatherley notes, the bus conductors would jokingly announce Finchley Road on the route as Finchley Strasse. Indeed, Weschke would frequent the Cosmo, which you can see in these images here, a bistro-style restaurant at the Swiss cottage end of that road, Finchley Road. And it became known as a gathering place for those who had fled Nazi persecution. And at first, it might seem incongruous that a former Nazi might move within such circles. By this point, however, Weschke's political outlook had changed dramatically. He was, for example, attending anarchist meetings, counted Jewish and homosexual acquaintances among his friends, and he was introduced to the cafe by a regular face, the poet and philosopher Alfred Reynolds. He had first met Reynolds during his work on the denazification programs in the prisoner of war camps. In this respect, what they had in common is that they were all refugees, a long way from home, just via different routes. Also in 1949, Weschke enrolled to study sculpture at the now famous St Martin's School of Art in central London. As said, it is perhaps anticipated that he chose sculpture, yet his time there was short-lived, just one term after he fell out with his tutor and left the course. Paradoxically, this brief and turbulent period proved pivotal, effectively setting him on the path to become a painter. Among the life models there at the school was Dorothy Mead, who we can see in this picture here, herself a painter associated with David Bomberg and the Borough Group. She encouraged Weschke to take up painting, and he soon became firmly connected to the Borough Group, even travelling with them to Spain, to Ronda, in 1953 when they reformed as the Borough Bottega. Shortly before these travels, Weschke also met the Berlin-born painter Frank Auerbach, another of Bomberg's students, though it seems the two did not get on. Given that Auerbach and his parents had arrived in England in 1939 as refugees fleeing Nazi persecution, this is perhaps unsurprising. Weschke had started to attend painting classes at the Borough Polytechnic a year earlier in 1948 and was offered a place at St Martin's in that same year. Of the work from that period, this painting, which is Standing Nude by Karl Weschke in 1949, clearly reflects the secondary influence of Bomberg and the Borough Group, with a style that sits very closely in that lineage. I also associate the contemplative pose of the nude here with the possible influence of Wilhelm Lehmbruck. Weschke is certainly known to have seen a number of Lehmbruck sculptures in exhibitions such as Sculpture in the Open Air, including in the 1954 iteration at London's Holland Park, where Lehmbruck's Großes Ende, 1914, which was titled and translated in the castle quite clumsily as Finke, was shown, alongside the work of Barlach and the Berlin-born Julie Nimsch. So if we place that painting next to Lehmbruck's Pensive Woman from 1911, we can clearly see how that influence may have had a bearing. After that whirlwind term at St Martin's School of Art, Weschke found work as a road sweeper. Even so, he stayed closely connected to the artistic world, maintaining relationships with fellow artists and constantly seeking ways to develop his emerging practice. He would, for instance, sketch in the ballet classes led by Vera Volkova in her shabby London studio, meeting the lights of Margot Fontaine. And he also earned money painting sets for Berto Pasuca, who we can see here in that second image, and his Le Ballet Negres, Europe's first all-black dance company. Following his return from Spain, he took on an altogether different role as a lion feeder's assistant at the Bertram Mills Circus at Olympia in London. The big cats, both lions and tigers, were on a residency from the Swiss Circus Knie, and they took their commands in German, so this was potentially a life-saving consideration. During his breaks, Weschke would sit and draw the cats, and he also made some woodblock prints of these, very much taking their cue from German Expressionism. Weschke's painting in the early 1950s, such as this example, Standing Woman Looking Down, this has recently been named as Figure Undressing, I believe, shows him navigating German art historical influences. As I explore in my book, there are again clear echoes of German Expressionism, while the handling of the paint also shares a distinct parallel with the work of Max Liebermann, particularly if we place his work alongside, for example, Liebermann's paintings of bathing boys and orphans, such as here. So side by side, we can begin to unpick how Weschke may have been drawn to painterly influence from Liebermann. Given that Lieberman's paintings of this series, such as this one, appear to depict young orphans, I also wonder whether Weschke may have seen in them a reflection of his own childhood, and maybe that was the initial appeal. So moving on in our Karl Weschke timeline, in February 1955, Weschke took a job as a bouncer at the Esmeralda's Barn, which was a nightclub in London's Knightsbridge, and that quickly drew a clientele of prominent figures, so Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, etc. This position was short-lived, however, because in late summer that year, he relocated to Cornwall. Weschke moved in 1955 to Tregerfen, which is a small hamlet near Zena, so about 4 miles or 6 kilometres from St Ives. His move was influenced by the artist Brian Winter, who had met earlier in London through their mutual friend, the cinematographer Manny Wynne. By that time, Weschke was already determined to pursue a career as an artist. Knowing this, Winter wrote to him to inform him that a cottage had become available at Tregerfen, and he helped Weschke arrange his tenancy. If you know Cornwall, it's hard to imagine now, but it was once an inexpensive place to be. Weschke arrived at a cottage that didn't have any electricity, it didn't have any running water, but what he couldn't have anticipated was the persistence of a deeply rooted suspicion towards Germans, a quiet and enduring sense of othering that was tied to the history of the cottage itself. Mermaid Cottage had previously been home to the writer D.H. Lawrence and his German wife Frieda von Richthofen. Between February 1916 and October 1917, so that's when they lived there, quite a short period. Frieda was the cousin of the well-known First World War flying ace Manfred von Richthofen, more commonly known as the Red Baron. The Lawrences had come seeking renewal, hoping to establish an artistic and literary commune, but were ultimately driven out of Cornwall amid accusations of signalling to German U-boats across the sea behind their cottage by leaving their lights on or using their washing line to convey secret coded messages. Brian Winter quickly introduced Weschke to the many artists who had made Penwith, the western part of Cornwall, their home. He also served as a visiting tutor at the St Peter's Loft in nearby St Ives, which was run by the artists Peter Lanyon and William Redgrave, and that's the image that we have here, Peter Lanyon teaching. Lanyon was impressed by Weschke's connections to the Borough Group, the students of David Bomberg, as I said, and subsequently offered him a place as a tutor at the school. He clearly saw something in Weschke's early work that aligned with the school's aims, and to put that simply, that was a grounding in realism, a commitment to painting at a time when, to Lanyon's mind, the art of St Ives and wider Penwith area had become overly constructivist and therefore increasingly detached from Cornwall itself. Marlowe Moss, in retrospect, can now be seen as part of that impulse, but as we know, Marlowe Moss remained very much an outsider in her own right. The St Peter's Loft, its teaching and its students is something that I explore in my books. I'm not going to get bogged down in the complexities of that today. But Lanyon also found a point of personal connection with Weschke through language. Lanyon spoke a little bit of German when Karl Weschke's English was still patchy. Lanyon had previously abandoned his Latin and German studies in order to pursue art. Meanwhile, Brian Winter was often in London, maintaining close personal connections with artists like John Craxton, John Minton, Lucian Freud, and he would frequently offer Weschke a lift to the capital, a 6-hour journey by car to see exhibitions. In 1956, during one of their visits, Weschke and Winter attended an exhibition together at the Tate Gallery called 100 Years of German Painting, 1850 to 1950. The catalogue introduction described it at the time as beyond doubt the most important and representative exhibition of late 19th century and 20th century German art yet seen in Britain. It featured several artists Weschke would later cite as influential, so Max Liebermann, Lovis Corinth, alongside works by Erich Heckel, Adolf von Menzel, and the Austrian-born Oskar Kokoschka. The only woman represented in the exhibition was Paula Motzen-Becker. With hindsight, this points to a limitation in the range of Weschke's influences, which remained predominantly male. At the same time, it reflects the broader conditions of the period and the canon of work that was made available to him in his time. One painting that was on display at the Tate became highly influential in Weschke's formative development, helping him begin to refine and shape his own artistic voice. And on screen is Franz Marc's Horse in a Landscape from 1910, and beside it you can see a painting by Karl Weschke titled Blue Horse and Black Fawn from 1957. So this was completed in that year after he had visited that exhibition at the Tate. The composition is strikingly similar, almost near identical in structure, with that horse's head turned away from us in both. However, Weschke's handling of paint is quite different. That's because it's that return to that Bombergian borough group approach. The paint is applied quite quickly, urgently. There's this sense of haste. It's more tactile. It has this energetic quality. As Frank Auerbach recalled about the teaching of Bomberg and the approaches of the borough group, he said that they were encouraged to find an image for the structure at a pretty deep level, to not get caught up in unnecessary detail and to forget the conventions and constraints of traditional draftsmanship entirely. It's precisely that sense that we see here. In 1956, during that same visit to Tate, Weschke and Winter also visited the Marino Marini exhibition at London's Hanover Gallery. Marini's equestrian sculptures were also a significant influence on his work at this time, and you can see how in the Weschke, unlike the painting by Franz Marc, you can see the tops of the horse's spindly legs, so it's very much like those Marini sculptures that you see. As we're also beginning to see with Marc in particular, so German influences are now being brought into that German context for the first time. And this doesn't stop with Marc, as we will see throughout the rest of this lecture. Another key exhibition that Weschke encountered in London was Art in Revolt, Germany, 1905 to 25 at the Marlborough Gallery in 1959, which was organised by Professor Will Groman. Again, the exhibition includes artists that Weschke would later cite as important influences, so Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, Max Beckmann at Barlach, Franz Marc, Wilhelm Lembruck. Framed in the context of the 1959 World Refugee Year, the exhibition carried significant cultural and political weight. It helped reposition these German and Austrian modernists as central figures in the development of modern art for a British audience, and this was a significant contribution to the broader rehabilitation of German modernism in Britain. For Weschke, this presentation of German art was especially impactful, offering a vision of it as something that was both culturally significant and for him a source of artistic pride and inspiration. In the early 1960s, Weschke's work remained firmly grounded in German art historical traditions, whilst also absorbing the growing influence of American abstract expressionism that was sweeping through the art of Cornwall. This was a period of active exchange. So Mark Rothko had visited St Ives in 1959. He stayed with Karl Weschke's mentor, Peter Lanyon, at his home in neighbouring Carbis Bay. Weschke met Rothko at the garden party that was hosted by Lanyon in the artist's honour. Apparently they got on very well. Against this backdrop then, Weschke's paintings from this period, such as Hanging from 1961, which we can see here, bring together these different influences. So in this case, they fuse the legacy of Lovis Corinth, for example, with the legacy of American abstract expressionism. And Weschke was drawing inspiration in particular from Corinth's depictions of slaughterhouses and hanging animal carcasses. If we place Weschke's Hanging alongside Corinth's slaughtered calves from 1896, we can clearly see how this influence translated across the work. Corinth, the son of a tanner, was of course surrounded by animal flesh from an early age, a proximity that shaped both his visual language and his sense of social identity. Because tanneries were typically located in the outskirts of towns due to their strong antisocial odours, he grew up effectively apart from the rest of society. Corinth later described this as a harsh childhood marked by a sense of being othered, a condition that finds a clear parallel in Weschke's own life, growing up as he did in an orphanage. Unlike the Weschke paintings we've seen before, Pillar of Smoke, which is from 1964, stands out for its simplicity. It's maybe even more impactful because of this. This pared-down approach seems to reflect Karl Weschke's exposure to American abstract expressionism, signalling a shift from the raw intensity of his earlier works, like his Hanging Carcass series. However, despite this change, there remains a sense of Weschke grappling with his past, a theme that goes through much of his work. Weschke's work can clearly be seen as that coming to terms with and grappling with the past. The painting is inspired by the controlled burning of gorse on the moorlands of West Cornwall. I've put the German for gorse there. So it's deliberately set on fire as part of land management. So it's a practice that's been carried out in Cornwall for hundreds of years and elsewhere, for that matter. So Weschke's response to this man-made fire is captured in that sort of large form, that black mass that's rising quite ominously out of the Cornish landscape. And the image carries a dark, threatening presence, evoking memories of Weschke's native Germany. So he, in relation to this work and others, cited the bombing of Dresden, for example. More hauntingly, he said it also alluded to the mass burning of bodies in concentration camps during the Holocaust. So there's this inescapable shadow and association. In December of 1964, so the year that this was painted, Weschke was staying with the artist Paul Feiler in Bristol. Feiler was born into a German Jewish family in Frankfurt am Main, and he had fled Nazi persecution with his parents in 1936. By 1960, he had become the head of painting at the West of England College of Art in Bristol, in southwest England, and he was also a visiting tutor of the St. Peter's Loft School, and he was often invited, Karl Weschke, to Bristol to teach his students. While in Bristol, Weschke received a redirected telegram that took him by surprise. It was from his sister Gisela, informing him that their mother was seriously ill and that it was her dearest wish to see him again. Fearing that his mother was nearing her end, Weschke bought a second-class train ticket to London, and then from there he made his way to East Germany. With his DDR passport still in hand, he was granted permission to enter West Germany, where he spent Christmas with his sister and mother in Oberhausen in Duisburg. This was Weschke's first visit to Germany since he was brought to Britain as a prisoner of war, and as explored also in my book, this visit, this reconnection with Germany, reverberated through his subsequent work that was made after this. For example, in 1966, Weschke, uncharacteristically for him, used a German word to title one of his paintings as Sturmfloten, or in translation, storm surge. The painting was made at a time when Cornwall had experienced intense windstorms that brought considerable damage to the region. By choosing this title, Weschke's painting embodies both inner and outer turmoil, reflecting the turbulence of confronting his past through the lens of the present. Later, in 1971, when Weschke had a travelling solo exhibition, the curator Jazia Reichardt remarked on his work in the accompanying catalogue, and I'm going to quote from that now. Weschke's paintings are undecorated and tough, sometimes even harsh, so it may seem surprising that they should incorporate such contradictory qualities as tenderness. Perhaps it is this very contradiction and the fact that they are capable of moving one so deeply is embodied in the fact that they are what we call real paintings. So this insight into his work sort of underscores that powerful duality of his pieces, rugged and tender, mirroring the complexities of the title here. It's sort of deeper meanings. So the theme of the Cornish landscape as a site of hostility persists into the 1970s, and that's seen in works such as this. So this is Body on the Beach from 1977 to 78. And this painting represents a deep exploration of a particular moment, and this painting took Karl Weschke 8 months to complete. As he explained, it captured a person in the ultimate situation of distress, and the body here is a version of Karl Weschke's own. The figure lies supine and bloated, resembling a cadaver, lifeless on the sands, the skin tone shifting from puce to brown, evoking a process of decay. The painting was rooted in real-life experiences in 1977 when Weschke went diving off the lobsters off Priest Cove, located further along the coast from St Ives. He ran into trouble underwater, and he was forced to make a desperate 120 foot, a 36-meter emergency ascent. Exhausted and in a dazed state, his body was washed up on the Brisons rocks, where he was, fortunately for him, found, and he was dragged to safety. Left disorientated on the sand in the harsh sun, Weschke later described feeling like a piece of meat, and he believed that he was on the verge of death. When creating this painting, memories of his past resurfaced, particularly those of dead bodies that he had encountered during combat. In the mid to late 1970s to 1980s, Weschke was turning back to the figurative, and we can see this here. So much had shifted in Cornwall's art scene, especially after the death of his mentor Peter Lanyon in August 1964. And Weschke began to carve out his own artistic voice in new ways, and he found new inspiration again by revisiting the art history of Germany as a fuel for this creative evolution. This painting, Nude by the Window, was created in 1981. It features a nude female figure positioned by a window, her arms stretched above her head to conceal her face. She gazes towards the light that softly illuminates both her and the brass bedpost beside her. The window frame divides into thirds, adding a structural rhythm that is often present in Weschke's paintings. There is a quiet intimacy to this painting, but what I find particularly compelling is that the figure, through her posture, retains an air of anonymity. In my research on Weschke, as I've mentioned before, I devoted a significant amount of time to exploring these sculptural influences on his work. This painting in particular is especially relevant to the location of this evening's talk. And here you can see I have placed Weschke's Nude by the Window next to a Georg Kolbe sculpture titled Amazona. I believe this is Kleiner Amazona, this version, dated from around 1912 with other additions into the 1920s. It was through my many conversations with Elisa, through working here at the superb archive and collections that are held here at the Georg Kolbe Museum, that I was able to begin to unpick the potentials of this German sculptural influence. In the 1980s, Weschke visited Germany on a few occasions. For instance, as we can see in this photograph here, I also wonder if this is maybe where he'd seen Kolbe's sculpture. Maybe it sort of, reminded him. So here, Weschke is seen leaning casually against the side of the Samson fountain in Gera's Market Square, with a Trabant visible on the left of the image and the town hall standing in the background behind him. In my research, Weschke finds Gera still a part of the German Democratic Republic at the point this was taken, both distant from his formative memories and in certain ways also very unchanged. The photograph is very much evidence of that disconnection. On the one hand, the market square remains unmistakably familiar, but other things like the Trabant are not. In 1988, Weschke was in Germany again, but this time with a TV crew to film a documentary titled A Memory of Sweetness. This was filmed for Southwest Television in the UK. The film opens with Weschke standing on a viewing platform overlooking the Berlin Wall at Brandenburg Gate, accompanied by the narrated line from Goethe's Faust, "In the beginning was the act." It then shifts to Paris, where Weschke is interviewed by John Berger beside the Seine, before finally returning to Gera, where he reflects on the moments and meanings of his childhood there. As the narrator states, Weschke's childhood self seemed to him like a half-forgotten fiction. So with this renewed contact with Germany in the 1980s, Weschke was able to see and directly engage with the contemporary development shaping German painting at that time. And this is something that I find evidence of throughout the decade, but particularly so in the case of West German figurative painting. Weschke, so I've discovered, was turning to that neo-expressionist impulse seen in German painting in the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, the so-called Neue Wilder, the new wild ones, the new fauves. In a place renowned for its mythology and folklore as Cornwall, so just think of the legend of Tristan and Isolde, with Tristan being the nephew of a Cornish king, how it is a place shaped by a distinct blend of pre-Christian beliefs and its rich tales of the supernatural, giants, mermaids, miracles. Weschke didn't really engage with this tradition directly. Instead, Weschke's mythological engagement, which we see particularly in the 1980s, instead seemingly takes its inspiration from those developments in German painting of the time. This is Weschke's Europa and the Bull from 1988 to 89, which was painted not long after he had returned from his 1988 trip to Germany. The painting's title and subject are in relation to the ancient myth of Zeus, who transformed himself into a white bull as a means of abducting the beautiful princess Europa. This painting then serves as an allegory for the ongoing turmoil of Europe, and in this case, particularly the ideological and physical divisions wrought by the Cold War. In the mid-1970s and throughout the 1980s, Weschke increasingly created allegorical works in which his figures functioned as stand-ins for moral commentary, carrying deeper layers of meaning beneath their surface depiction. A similar tendency runs through the work of many of those mostly West German painters of the period, so consider, for instance, the modernist alienation theme in Helmut Middendorf's paintings, the historical residues embedded in the work of Walter Dahn, or the unstable, urgent identities in Rainer Fetting's figures, or alongside the more distant, withdrawn presences found in the work of Ina Barfus and Bettina Semmer. If we consider then Weschke's Europa and the Bull alongside a work such as this, Werner Büttner's Brothers Cain and Abel, we can see how this German painting of the period may have influenced Weschke, may have influenced his work. Here, Büttner presents us with an image of fratricide as a metaphor for the division of Germany and the destructive nature of the Cold War, evoking a sense of violence that is both intimate and political. In both Weschke's Europa and the Bull, Europa and the Büttner painting that we see here on screen, the imagery can be read as being about conflict, division, and displacement, but also a desire, or perhaps in Weschke's case, a need to find a place to belong. Together, these works suggest not only the physical ruptures of divide, but also the psychological strain in the tense position of existing between fractured places and identities. Weschke shares with these German painters a need to use their brush to explore and excavate the alienations of humanity. Whenever I'm here in Berlin, if time allows, I'm actually going to visit tomorrow morning, I think. I always try to make a visit of a point of visiting the Bernhard Heiliger Stiftung in Dahlem. And on one visit many years ago, in that back gallery space, there was a small display of Heiliger's portrait busts, his Kopfer. And as I looked at them, I found myself wondering whether Weschke might have known of Heiliger's work. Both artists seem to capture a sense of quiet tension and anguish, but in an unsensational manner and without drama. The display included heads of several well-known figures, such as the philosopher Martin Heidegger, alongside others who are especially familiar here in Germany at least, including West Berlin Mayor Ernst Reuter and West German President Theodor Heuss, whom the U-Bahn station down the road is named after, of course. It also featured a few of Heidegger's more anonymous works, such as those, for example, that are simply titled Frauenkopf, Woman's Head. In the early 1950s, Weschke, just like Heidegger, had trained as an apprentice with a stone carver, and I became interested in how their early education, in sculptural form at least, followed a comparable path. Weschke's in London and Heidegger's in Stettin in the early 1930s. Although it seems unlikely that Weschke had an awareness of Heidegger's work in the early 1950s, his attention, we know for certain, was directed to the work of Henry Moore and Jacob Epstein, who were also reducing the figure to its essentials. I wondered if Weschke may have had the opportunity to encounter Heidegger's work through Heidegger's inclusion at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London in 1953 in connection to the competition for the Monument for the Unknown Political Prisoner, or indeed later in 1958 at Heidegger's exhibition at Roland Brau's and Del Banco. However, whether Weschke can be said to be directly influenced by Heidegger's work or not, Heidegger nonetheless became a crucial lens through which I, as an art historian, could begin to unpack and understand potential influences on Weschke, particularly in relation to artists who are quietly working to disentangle the associations of the recent war and its lingering traumas. I kept returning to this sculpture by Heidegger titled Kopf Karl Hofer from 1951. And there are other versions of this sculpture, but this is the one that is cast in cement. This is, of course, the painter Karl Hofer. Hofer was one of the artists that Weschke had seen in the Tate German Art Exhibition in 1956, whose presence there spanned 8 works across paintings and works on paper. In this sculpture, I am interested in how, much like Weschke does in his paintings, a simple figure, or indeed a partial figure in this case, can convey so much. It becomes loaded with implication, a stand-in for the traumas of a recent past. Branded degenerate by the National Socialist regime, Hoefer was banned from teaching. His ex-wife, Mathilde, was murdered at Auschwitz in 1942. His home and studio were destroyed in bombing, and his son was killed in 1947 following a violent assault. Hoefer died 4 years after Heiliger completed the sculpture in 1955, and he is therefore caught at the end of an extremely turbulent life. While this is not the depiction of physical harms, it instead presents a man who is emotionally shattered. Those sunken eyes, the tightly drawn brow, the mouth caught in a tremble, all of this works to suggest a deep and internal collapse. The neck, much like we saw in Weschke's Blue Horse, is straining, adding a sense of awkward tension. Heiliger reduces Hoefer to a compressed presence, and the cement seems to intensify this. It's as if Hoefer is almost trapped within the sculpture, as if he is pressed up against the material itself from the inside. It is also interesting, given Heiliger spent much of the Second War as an army radio operator, that communication in his work is so complex. Throughout the 1990s, Weschke's paintings underwent a significant shift in focus, inspired by a series of trips to Egypt that were made across the decade and into the early noughties. At first glance, work from this period, such as the Nile near Ombo from 1994, now part of the Tate collection, can seem almost incongruous when considered alongside the paintings that we have seen so far this evening. Their mood and appearance are remarkably different. There is a new simplicity to the compositions and a transformed sense of colour and light. However, when we consider what Weschke is painting, tombs and temples, parched and unforgiving sands, mythological subjects, and isolated human figures or animals moving through these landscapes, a continuity suddenly comes into focus. Of course, if we think back to the young Karl Weschke, who, as I said earlier, was obsessed with the adventure stories of Karl May, Egypt, I'm sure, represented a world of mystery and adventure. On screen here is the poster for the 1936 adaptation of May's Across the Desert, the first of his novels to be brought to the big screen. Shot entirely on location in Egypt, the story follows a German adventurer travelling towards the holy city of Mecca. Along the way, the body of a murdered man is discovered, transforming the journey into a dangerous pursuit of a notorious criminal. Blending adventure, mystery, romance, and highly exoticized portrayals of the Orient, as it was then termed, the film reflects an escapist appeal and the problematic cultural attitudes of its era. When the Nile near Ombo is placed alongside a still from the film, the visual parallels are striking, particularly their shared emphasis on the vastness of the landscape. Although this resemblance, of course, likely stems from the fact they are both simply depicting the same environment, one caught in film, the other, reimagined in paint and charcoal. This adds a slight disruption to the largely chronological approach to the lecture, but I thought it was worth also considering this here. The role of an art historian, after all, is not simply to repeat established facts, but to connect the dots between them to explore what is probable as well as possible. It involves interpreting evidence in context and building an informed understanding, particularly where records are incomplete. Although this is not something I explore in my monograph in extended detail, I also find myself wondering whether Weschke's beloved Karl May adventure stories may have informed earlier works, such as this one titled Caliban from 1978. Placed alongside another film still from that film, Across the Desert, the focus is drawn to an anonymous prone body discovered lying in the sand. Weschke explained that Caliban strongly related to the layered memories of his past, particularly his wartime experiences of seeing dead bodies in conflict. Caliban is a character from The Tempest by William Shakespeare, often described as monstrous, yet despite his afflictions, he maintains a deep poetic bond with the natural world around him. The enslaved Caliban, particularly today, can be seen to bring together the themes of colonization, power, and conflict between humanity and nature. Weschke saw in him a reflection of his own turbulent past, where in Weschke's case, painted landscapes became an arena to grapple with these associations. In 1999, Weschke made an unexpected appearance on German television when he was invited onto the ZDF, the Johannes B. Kerner show for its regular chat segment titled On the Couch with JBK. Sharing the sofa with the comedians Helga Schneider and Karl Dahl alongside the actor Maren Gilzer, Weschke was introduced by Kerner inaccurately as a London painter living in Wales. Even so, the programme marked an important moment in his gradual emergence within German public consciousness. In the context of the show, Weschke was presented simply and unequivocally also as a German painter. At that time, the ZDF website noted a paradox that although his paintings were held in major museum collections, and I quote here, "Nobody knows him in his German homeland, how can this be?" As minor as the appearance may have seemed, it suggested that this curiously displaced German artist had at least begun to be noticed in Germany. On the 29th of September 2001, the exhibition Karl Weschke, the German retrospective, opened at the Kunstsammlung Gera, and it marked the first major presentation of Karl Weschke's work in his hometown. More than 2 decades later, the Kunstsammlung returned to Weschke's legacy of an exhibition titled Back in Town, which was staged earlier this year across its 2 venues. The early noughties confirmed Weschke's standing as an artist of significance in Britain, Cornwall and Germany. In 2003, for example, he was made an honorary citizen of Gera, followed in 2004 by being awarded the Cross of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. 2004 was also the year that the retrospective exhibition opened at Tate St Ives, titled Karl Weschke, Beneath a Black Sky. Yet in many respects, all of this sudden recognition came too late in his life because Weschke died the following year in 2005. I was just 16 years old when I visited that exhibition at Tate St Ives in 2004. As someone who had grown up in Cornwall, we were sometimes taken on school trips to Tate St Ives. We were shown artworks by the likes of Barbara Hepworth, Ben Nicholson, Terry Frost, but Weschke's work looked and felt very different. There was a darkness and an eeriness, and the colour palette with its ochres, its khakis and browns truly felt like Cornwall to me, the one that I knew all year round, not just in its busy, tourist-filled summers. Even at this young age, I was deeply into and interested in art and art history. I would save up my pocket money and birthday money and travel into Truro, Cornwall's only city, to buy art books and otakers, most of which I still have and use in my work today. As my career developed to become a curator and art historian, I never forgot about that exhibition, and I would return to the small catalogue that was produced to accompany it. However, as someone navigating the art world professionally, I was baffled by Weschke's absence and how difficult it remained to see his work after what I thought was such an important exhibition. Following his death, he was sadly largely forgotten. In 2018, I enrolled to study for my PhD, and my doctoral thesis, Karl Weschke and the Reframing of Cornish Modernism, was awarded in November 2023. This talk tonight is part of the series From the Margins, Rediscovered Lives and Archives, and it was in the archives where I could begin to rediscover an artist who had become almost lost. However, it is Weschke who invites us to rethink the modern and indeed contemporary art of Cornwall, to unsettle the linear narratives that have shaped its history and to open space for thinking. At Tate St Ives today, this is articulated in a collection display titled Modern Thresholds, Roe Robertson, an installation view of which you can see here on screen. Robertson's interlude, shown alongside Weschke's Pillar of Smoke, responds directly to the tidal landscape of Porthmere Beach and the shifting shoreline of the island and Carrick Dhu, which is visible beyond the window. So if you look through the window in front of this display, that's what you see. Roe engages with the Cornish landscape through a queer lens, describing how nature itself is fluid, unfixed and non-binary, resisting fixed categories or singular readings. As the exhibition here at the Georg Kolbe Museum makes known through the work of Marlowe Moss, Cornwall has long functioned as more than just a site of artistic exploration. It has been, for many artists, a deeply personal and affective terrain, shaped as much by lived experience as it is by aesthetic encounter. As the text accompanying the collection display at Tate St Ives remind us, Cornwall is a space of social and environmental transformation, and this is very much the case for Weschke. My hope is that my research, along with the forthcoming monograph, will position Weschke as a profoundly important Anglo-German painter, whose life story, and more importantly his art history, have so far only been partially told. The culmination of over 7 years' research, the book aims to situate Weschke within the wider artistic and intellectual context to which he belongs, and to enable his work and legacy to be considered with the depth and seriousness they merit. At a memorial held to Weschke in Newlyn in Cornwall following his death in 2005, Weschke's friend John le Carré gave a speech in which he listed the books found on Weschke's bedside. Ancient Art to Post-Impressionism, a handbook on Cairo, German ballads, the Jeeves Omnibus, but the most poignant, the box full of Thomas Mann. This selection offers a striking and revealing summation, not just of Weschke's interest, but of the layered nature of his life. It speaks of the post-impressionism of Lovis Corinth, the allure and adventure of Egypt, the rootedness to German tradition, and the shifting social and cultural navigations between Germanness, Britishness, and Cornishness. This lecture tonight, of course, only skims the surface of my research, and I'm very excited that the monograph will allow Weschke to emerge within art history in a more full way. Karl Weschke may be one of the greatest painters that Germany does not yet realise it has, a visionary who transformed exile, memory, and landscape into works of immense force. Thank you very much.